Wang Yibo seriously injured, and the first person to run to his side was Xiao Zhan. The real story behind the accident that shocked the nation. What if the moment that proved the bond between Wang Yibo and Xiao Zhan wasn't a performance? Not a fan meeting. Not a show reunion. But a crisis that unfolded in seconds, under the blinding floodlights of a chaotic filming set? What if the truth behind that accident, the one everyone heard whispers about, was far more dramatic, far more emotional, and far more revealing than any headline ever captured? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update in the world of your favorite celebrities. Tonight, we step deep into that moment. Into the fear, the shock, and the unspoken connection that surfaced the instant Wang Yibo fell. This is a cinematic, documentary-style retelling of what really happened the night the industry almost lost one of its brightest stars. The night everything changed. It was supposed to be an ordinary shoot. A routine evening on a closed set where Wang Yibo was filming a high-speed action sequence, nothing he hadn't done 100 times before. The crew was calm. The director was confident. Yibo himself was focused, professional, ready. But in action scenes, even the smallest miscalculation can turn the air electric. And that is exactly what happened. During a fast-paced movement, the unexpected struck. A slip, a mistimed turn, a sudden imbalance, the kind that you can't predict even with years of training. There was no dramatic crash. No alarming sound. Just a moment where everything shifted, and Wang Yibo went down hard. The entire set froze. For a heartbeat, there was silence, pure and terrifying. Then chaos. The first person to move wasn't a paramedic, it was Xiao Zhan. Xiao Zhan had arrived on set earlier that evening. Quietly. Privately. He wasn't there for publicity. He wasn't there for work. He was simply visiting a friend. And in the split second Yibo fell, before the director shouted cut, before the crew realized what had happened, Xiao Zhan was already running. He didn't think about cameras. He didn't think about the crowd. He didn't think about what anyone would say later. He moved on instinct. By the time staff members reached Yibo, Xiao Zhan was already kneeling beside him, steadying him, speaking to him softly, trying to keep him calm. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't staged. It was real. People who were there later said, the moment he saw Yibo go down, he didn't hesitate. He cleared the distance faster than anyone else. The tension in the air. Wang Yibo was conscious. Shaken. In pain. But awake. Xiao Zhan kept a steadying hand on him, reassuring him in a calm voice that held back every trace of fear. You're okay. Stay still. Help is coming. Staff rushed in. Medical teams moved fast. But Xiao Zhan didn't stand up or move aside until the paramedics physically asked him to. And even then, he stayed close. Watching. Listening. Making sure Yibo wasn't alone in the most frightening moment of his career. It wasn't the kind of scene the industry was prepared to witness. Two of the biggest stars in Asia, in a moment stripped of image, stripped of fame, stripped of expectation. Just two human beings. One hurt. One refusing to leave his side. The ride to the hospital. When the paramedics lifted Wang Yibo onto the stretcher, Xiao Zhan followed immediately. Someone from the staff tried to tell him to stay back, that the crew and managers could handle it, that his presence would create media chaos. He didn't even respond. He got into the ambulance anyway. Inside, Yibo was breathing through discomfort, trying to stay composed. Xiao Zhan sat near him, still speaking softly, still grounding him, still watching every movement of the medical team. Witnesses described the atmosphere like this: it felt less like two top stars in a crisis, and more like two brothers going through something only they understood. The hospital wait that tested every nerve at the hospital. Security scrambled to control the crowd that gathered within minutes. Managers rushed to make statements. Fans flooded the parking lot, crying, praying, waiting for news. But Xiao Zhan didn't move from the hallway outside the treatment room. He refused to leave. He refused to rest. He refused to go home. He waited. Even as the night deepened. Even as exhaustion settled. Even as staff tried to coax him into resting in the private lounge. He stayed. One staff member later said, he looked terrified, but he held himself together for Yibo's sake. You could see the emotion, but he didn't let it show. The first update comes out after hours of examinations. The doctor finally stepped out. Xiao Zhan stood immediately. It wasn't life-threatening. But it was serious enough to require immediate treatment, monitoring, and rest. When the doctor finished explaining, Xiao Zhan finally exhaled, long, shaky, relieved in a way he couldn't hide. He hadn't realized how long he'd been holding his breath until that moment. The moment Yibo woke up when Wang Yibo finally opened his eyes in the recovery area, the first thing he saw wasn't a doctor. Not a nurse. Not a manager. It was Xiao Zhan. Sitting beside the bed. Still in the clothes he had arrived in. His expression exhausted but relieved. Yibo looked at him, confused. You're still here? Xiao Zhan let out a quiet laugh. Where else would I be? For a second, Yibo tried to smile through the discomfort. Trust you to make a dramatic entrance in an emergency. Xiao Zhan shook his head. Trust you to scare all of us half to death. It was the kind of exchange only two people who share years of unspoken understanding could have in a moment like this. Not dramatic. Not performative. Just honest. The industry reacts and fans are left in tears. The news broke by morning. Wang Yibo injured during film shoot. Xiao Zhan rushes him 2 hospital clips, eyewitness accounts, and behind-the-scenes details spread across every platform. Fans cried reading that Xiao Zhan never left his side. Others said the moment showed the truth behind their bond, one that never needed cameras or performances to exist. And the most viral comment appeared everywhere, you know someone's true heart not when the lights are on, but when they run toward you in the dark. No one inside that chilly emergency ward could forget the moment the automatic doors slid open again, and Xiao Zhan stepped out, not as a celebrity, not as a performer, but as someone carrying the weight of a friend's life on his shoulders. Reporters fell silent. Assistants froze mid-breath. Even the sound of the hospital's machines seemed to soften, as if the entire building was waiting for him to speak. But Xiao Zhan didn't speak. He simply lowered his head, inhaled slowly, and walked toward the waiting area where Wang Yibo's staff sat in a tight circle, their faces pale, their hands trembling. For the first time since the accident, the world saw something raw unfolding, something unscripted, unpolished, undeniably human. The two men everyone had spent years analyzing, debating, sometimes even pitting against one another, were suddenly bound together by something much larger than fame, rivalry, or fandom noise. They were bound by fear. And by the truth of what happened inside that ambulance. According to a staff member who later spoke quietly, almost reluctantly, Xiao Zhan did something that none of them expected. While paramedics stabilized Yibo, he kept talking to him, trying to keep him awake. Not with dramatic speeches. Not with panic. But with calm, steady words. The kind only someone who truly knows another person by heart would ever think to say. But that was only the beginning. Because what happened next is the moment fans still can't stop replaying. When the doctor finally emerged from the intensive care unit, holding a clipboard pressed to his chest, the hallway erupted in a silent storm of worry. Everyone stood. Everyone froze. Everyone watched. The doctor scanned the room, looking for the person who had arrived with Yibo. And then his eyes landed on Xiao Zhan. The expression that crossed Xiao Zhan's face, half relief, half fear, half exhaustion, was the kind that audiences never get to see on stage or on screen. It was real. It was unguarded. But the doctor didn't speak yet. He motioned for Xiao Zhan to step closer, away from the cameras, away from the crowd. The room followed with their eyes, as if leaning closer might reveal more of the truth. And that was when the whispers began. Theories. Rumors. Fragments of overheard conversations. Some said Wang Yibo woke up briefly and asked only one question. Others claimed he reached out for a hand, not knowing whose it was, and Xiao Zhan held it without hesitation. But the truth, the actual truth, remained locked behind the closed doors of that dim hallway conversation. Still, something had changed. Moments later, Xiao Zhan returned to the waiting area. But he didn't sit. He didn't pace. Instead, he planted both feet firmly on the ground, looked straight ahead, and exhaled, a long, controlled breath that carried both relief and determination. And then he said the words the world had been anxiously waiting for. Wang Yibo was safe. The worst had passed. He would recover.